Changshin Memory Technologies shipped its first functional double data rate 4 die, and then announced double data rate 5 qualification in roughly the same window that Micron takes to retool a single fab floor. 5 years ago, anyone watching China's memory industry would have called that cadence impossible. The question is not whether Micron is still ahead. It is. But whether the gap is closing faster than Micron can re-extend it before the next node locks in the competitive landscape for the rest of the decade. The unit at the center of this race is a single 1 alpha node double data rate 5 die, thumbnail-sized, 1 chip. It is what a server rack needs, what a smartphone baseband is waiting for, and what an entire domestic supply chain lives or dies on. Both companies are racing to ship it at volume, and the way you read the race depends entirely on which clock you watch. A lead in memory is not a number on a scorecard, it is a rate. Micron makes better dynamic random access memory today. That is not in dispute. But Changshin's clock is ticking at a cadence that has never been seen from a Chinese memory maker, and the real question is whether Micron's clock can tick faster before double data rate 5 and low power double data. Rate 5 set the floor for the rest of the decade. Start with the capacity leg, because this is where the compression is most visible and where the numbers are large enough to feel physical. Micron runs 3 primary dynamic random access memory fabs at high utilization. Facilities in Boise, Hiroshima, and Taichung, plus ongoing investment in its Boise expansion. The monthly wafer output from this network sets global spot pricing. Industry analysts consistently place Micron's share of global dynamic random access memory bit output above 20%, with Samsung and SK Hynix accounting for the rest of the top tier. The scale is mature. Micron has been compounding this network for decades, and the learning curve on fab utilization is encoded in the tools, the teams, and the process libraries. Expanding it further is expensive and steady. Each percentage point of additional capacity comes from a system that is already optimized. Changshin Memory Technologies has been expanding its Hefei fab complex at a pace that satellite imagery analysis and company announcements, cited by industry trackers, show has moved from a single building pilot line to a multi-phase production campus in roughly 5 years. The company's monthly wafer output has grown several-fold over that period. These are company-claimed figures, not independently audited numbers, and that distinction matters. The Chinese government has designated dynamic random access memory self-sufficiency as a strategic priority, and Changshin is the primary vehicle. Capital access has not been the binding constraint. The binding constraint has been process knowledge, equipment availability, and yield. And we will get to yield shortly, because that is where the compression story gets complicated. Picture what a wafer is, a round of silicon about 12 inches across. At leading-edge node density, a single wafer yields hundreds of individual dies, each one that thumbnail-sized double data, rate 5 chip. The capacity gap between Micron and Changshin right now is measurable in millions of those thumbnails per month. Put it in rack terms. A high-density artificial intelligence training system needs thousands of dynamic random access memory dies. The gap between these two companies, at current trajectory, closes to meaningful competitor range well before it closes to equal competitor range. And meaningful competitor is the threshold that starts moving markets, not the one that makes headlines. Micron's pace on capacity, decades of compounding to reach current output, with incremental expansion now measured in steady percentage points per year. Changshin's pace, reports suggest a doubling or more of wafer capacity within a 2 to 3 year window, starting from a lower base. The absolute output gap remains large. Changshin is not within striking distance of Micron's bit volume, but the rate of closure is the fastest any new entrant has posted in this industry since Samsung's aggressive scaling in the 1990s. The split is not close. The trajectory is the news. Think of it as 2 runners on a track where Micron has been lapping at a steady pace for years, and Changshin just found a second gear. Micron is still 3 laps ahead. Changshin is running each lap faster than the last, and Micron's lap times are roughly flat. Now carry that thumbnail die, that specific chip, into the next leg, because the node leg is where the compression story changes character. Micron is producing double data rate 5 on its 1 alpha and 1 beta node generations, and those nodes use extreme ultraviolet lithography for critical layers. Extreme ultraviolet allows single-pass patterning of features that would otherwise require multiple deep ultraviolet exposures. It is faster per layer, more consistent pass-to-pass, and enables tighter geometries at lower process complexity than the alternative. Micron has publicly discussed its extreme ultraviolet ramp and its roadmap toward 1 gamma. The node cadence is roughly 1 generation every 18 to 24 months, consistent with the broader industry rhythm, and each generation arrives at lower cost per bit because extreme ultraviolet reduces the step count. Changshin has announced double data rate 5 qualification, or the company's own claim, with limited independent benchmark confirmation as of mid-2025. The process node, Changshin, is using for double data. Rate 5 relies on deep ultraviolet lithography with multiple patterning passes to achieve geometries that approach but do not match what extreme ultraviolet produces in a single pass. Industry analysts who track Chinese semiconductor output describe this as a legitimate path to a functional double data rate 5 product, but one that costs more steps, more time per wafer, and more process complexity than the extreme ultraviolet route. Changshin cannot import extreme ultraviolet tools. Those systems are export controlled, so multi-patterning is not a strategic choice. It is the only road available. Here is where I want to push back on my own read of the capacity leg. More wafers running a more complex process is not automatically an advantage. It can mean more wafers with more variability, which feeds directly into yield. And yield is the leg that runs the other direction. But first, the nodes split. Imagine 2 cyclists racing the same mountain stage. Micron has a road bike built for the climb. Changshin has a mountain bike. Heavier, more mechanical complexity, not optimized for the gradient. But it is on the same mountain and it is moving. The destination is identical. The wattage required is not. That extra wattage is measurable. More process steps per wafer means more cost per die, and more cost per die means the margin structure of Changshin's double data rate 5 is structurally different from Micron's, even if the 2 chips that emerge test to similar specifications. Micron's pace on node advancement, 1 generation per roughly 2 years, with extreme ultraviolet enabling each shrink at lower process complexity than the generation before. Changshin's pace, arriving at the same node destination, double data, rate 5, qualification, but by a route that costs more steps per wafer and carries more process variability at each step. The gap here is not measured in generations. Changshin is at double data rate 5, which is where Micron is. The gap is measured in the cost and complexity of the journey. The node gap has compressed from multiple generations behind to same generation, different process path. That is real progress. The cost gap has not compressed at the same rate. And the cost gap feeds directly into the leg where the compression trend reverses. Yield is the ratio of working chips to wafers started, and it is the leg that runs the wrong way for Changshin. Micron's yield on mature double data rate 5 process nodes is not publicly disclosed. But Micron's gross margins and its pricing power in the server dynamic random access memory market are indirect indicators of yield health. When hyperscalers, the cloud infrastructure buyers who purchase dynamic random access memory in volumes that move markets, qualify a supplier, they run extensive incoming quality testing. The process is slow, conservative, and based on delivered consistency over time, not announced specifications. Micron has been a qualified supplier to every major hyperscaler for years. That qualification is not a certificate. It is a track record of chips that arrive within spec, lot after lot, month after month. Changshin's yield figures are company-claimed or inferred from shipment volumes. The most informative signal available is not from Changshin. It is from the buyers. Reports from Chinese technology media and industry analysts indicate that major Chinese hyperscalers, companies that have every political and regulatory incentive to source domestically, have been slow to fully qualify Changshin's double data rate 5 product for their most demanding workloads. Some have run mixed procurement. Changshin for less latency-sensitive applications, imported Micron or Samsung for inference and training stacks. This is not a conclusion that Changshin's product is defective. It is a signal that the consistency and predictability that hyperscalers require, the thing that converts a working chip into a qualified chip, is not yet there at the level the buyers need. When your home crowd hedges, that is information. The mirage case for Changshin closing this gap is straightforward and worth stating fully. Yield improves with volume and learning curve time. Every memory maker in history has started with lower yield and grown it. Changshin is early in its volume ramp. The hesitation from domestic buyers may reflect conservative procurement cycles more than fundamental product failure. If Changshin's multi-patterning process stabilizes and the learning curve compounds the way it has for every other memory maker, the yield gap could close materially within 2 to 3 years. The real lead case for Micron is structural. Yield in dynamic random access memory is not just a function of process tuning, it is a function of equipment consistency, materials supply chain maturity, and decades of process knowledge encoded in engineering teams and equipment fleets. Changshin is running a more complex process on tools that are, by necessity, not at the frontier of lithographic capability. More process steps means more opportunities for defects. A kitchen that can produce more plates per hour than last year still has a quality check at the pass. And the reservation list, meaning the buyer qualification pipeline, is what tells you whether customers believe in the kitchen yet. The trust deficit with buyers is not purely psychological. It is a rational response to a thinner track record on delivered consistency. That track record takes years of shipments to build, not quarters. Think of it as the pass-fail ratio, not the plate count. The number of wafers started is the plate count. The number of dies that clear the hyperscaler qualification threshold is the pass rate. And right now, the pass rate is the constraint, not the production rate. The yield gap is real. It is not closing as fast as the capacity gap. The buyer hesitation from domestic hyperscalers, the most politically motivated customers Changshin could have, is the cleanest available signal on where Changshin actually stands versus where it says it stands. But the gap is closable. The mechanism for closing it is the same compounding learning curve every memory maker has ridden. The question is whether Changshin gets enough volume and enough time before the next node transition resets the yield challenge entirely. Because at each node shrink, the yield clock restarts. 12 months out, here is my call, with the uncertainty labeled honestly. Changshin ships double data, rate 5, at meaningfully higher volume than today. The capacity gap to Micron continues to compress in percentage terms. Micron holds its node lead. The 1 beta and early 1 gamma ramp keeps Micron a process generation ahead in extreme ultraviolet enabled efficiency. The yield gap narrows but does not close. Reports suggest Changshin's domestic qualification rate with hyperscalers improves for standard server dynamic random access memory, but remains thin for the highest performance segments, high bandwidth memory, and low power double data rate, 5 for mobile, net. Changshin is a larger and more credible competitor in 12 months than it is today, but the trust deficit means Micron's effective market position, qualified, shipped, paid for, compresses more slowly than the raw wafer output numbers would suggest. My read is that the capacity leg tells a true story, and the yield leg tells a truer one. The clock that matters for Micron is not how fast Changshin can pour concrete and install tools. It is how fast Changshin can convert wafers into chips that hyperscalers will put in their racks without hedging. That clock is running slower than the fab expansion clock, and that is the gap Micron should be watching. The risk is that yield closes on the same compounding curve as capacity, just on a lag. And by the time the market sees it in the data, the pricing power shift has already happened. That thumbnail die, the double data rate 5 chip both companies are racing to ship, is sitting in qualification labs at hyperscalers in Beijing and in the United States right now. The ones that clear the pass go into racks. The ones that do not go back into the yield accounting. The ratio of pass to fail, not the number of wafers started, is what settles this race. The breakthrough is not that Changshin built more fabs. Fabs are capital. The breakthrough would be the moment Changshin's yield curve crosses the threshold where domestic buyers stop hedging, because that is when the pace of the memory market itself, Not just the pace of Changshin's construction schedule actually changes. Two clocks running, one built on decades of process knowledge, one running faster than anyone expected and slower than it claims. The finish line is not a fab. It is a purchase order from a buyer who stopped hedging. The question I want to leave you with: Changshin's capacity clock and Changshin's yield clock are running at different speeds right now. Which one closes first? And what does it mean for Micron's pricing power when it does? Drop your call in the comments. And if this kind of split-by-split breakdown is useful to you, the subscribe button is right there. This channel runs the race as it happens, not after the results are in.